simply because we have one of the top experts from the United States here. There is justice for crimes committed against the elderly. We've heard about that today. Most states have penalties for those who victimize older adults, and increasingly across the country, law enforcement officers as well as prosecutors are trained on elder abuse. That's why you're all here today as well. Review of elder justice laws and statistics, as you heard, are compiled by our federal government. From Washington, I'd like to welcome now Robert Blancatto. Robert is the national coordinator of the Elder Justice Coalition, and he's going to explain a little bit about that, and he will wrap things up, and there will be a question and answer period as well. And don't forget, we have our grand prize after that. Robert Blancatto, let's welcome him.
Thank you very much, Don, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for staying. Those of us who are the last speakers appreciate the folks being here. And this is really the comedy hour. I'm from Washington, D.C., which we refer to as Hollywood East these days. And I'd like to begin with an audience question, if I could. How many of you in this room have either shaken your head or your fist at Washington in the past year? Raise your hand. Okay, we'll have some conversation about this later. I'm leaving the first slide up, if we could put the first slide up, called Washington Update, because I have my email on there, and should you want copies of what I talk about, either the whole thing or parts of it, jot that down while I do a little bit of introductions here. It is nice to be back in the volunteer state. I was just here a couple weeks ago. I'm a new member of the ARP National Board, and we had our meeting in Nashville. But I'm actually here because my friend Aaron Bradley invited me. And Aaron Bradley is a treasure. Aaron Bradley is a leader in the aging field, not only in this area, but in the state and the nation. He and I worked together for many years, and I just want to salute him. And if nobody saluted him yet, please join me in saluting Aaron for his great work. And I also congratulate the 25 years anniversary of the East Tennessee Elder Watch. That is a significant accomplishment. You know, this field is relatively new, and if you have 25 years of service and history, that is really important. And, you know, I also want to salute, since I'm an ARP board member, their presence here today, and Bill Tolley, if he's still here, thank you for what he does, and Rebecca Kelly. And, you know, your speakers have been great. Paul Greenwood and I have done a lot of sessions together, and I think he just tells the story like nobody else can, and no one else will. Let's go to the next slide. This is not directly related to him, but I wanted to make sure that I did this as part of my work. I was at the O'Connor Senior Center today talking about both open enrollment and some other issues today. And since it's on the front page of your newspaper about flu shots, let's not forget older adults too when it comes to getting the necessary flu and pneumonia shots for the year ahead. Let's go to the next slide. So, you have heard a number about elder abuse and the extent to which it's a growing national problem. And, you know, let's just assume that 1 out of 10 people over the age of 60 is a victim. That translates to 6 million people annually and growing. But just remember, as has been said before, that's just the reported cases. You know, there could be 5 to 20 times as many unreported cases of elder abuse, which really makes that number more shocking and more significant. And your risk factors have been discussed, particularly being a woman living alone. And remember one thing, 46% of women over the age of 75 in this country now live alone. Okay? So you're talking about a situation that, unless we come to grips with it early on, will only get worse going forward. Next slide. So we have an elder justice movement that has begun and is picking up steam over time, but it's at a very critical juncture right now. It really began back in March of 2010 when the Elder Justice Act became law, a milestone of its own. Historic landmark legislation first introduced in 2003, but you know, if you know the story about legislation, it always grows out of somebody. Some interest, some champion, some finding, some whatever. And the two findings, one of which I have up here, was that when they looked in to see how much of our abuse prevention dollars were going for elder abuse, they determined less than 2% was going, while the numbers of cases of elder abuse was rising in that same time period. And I also discovered that not a single person in the entire federal government had elder abuse in their portfolio. So those two factors alone led to the passage in 2010 of the Elder Justice Act. And if we go to the next slide, I tell people, you know, if you were a member of Congress, and I shouldn't say that in these days, but just assume for the moment you were a member of Congress, and I said to you, I have a law that is bipartisan, that is modest in scope, and it's going to help older people. Do you think it's going to take 7 years to get it passed? It did. It took 7 years to get this law passed. And what was it doing? 7 years to get passed, and we're still working on getting adequate funding. But what's the most important part of this law? Number one, for those of you in APS, who's in APS in this room? APS folks here? You people are great. I'm big fans of APS around the country. But APS does not even have a dedicated funding stream. They're funded through a program called the Social Service Block Grant. And if you know anything about block grants give the governors of states enormous control to how they spend that money. And as a result of that, 13 states in this country don't spend a nickel on adult protective services because they don't have to. So the Elder Justice Act said we need to have APS get its own dedicated funding stream, as they are the front lines against elder abuse in this country. We want to give more support, and the Elder Justice Act does, to the nursing home long-term care ombudsman program. Because, you know, reports of abuse in nursing homes, we know very well, are on the rise. And this bill also created a program to allow states to do criminal background checks on people seeking to get employment in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. The story that led to this was in 2003, they did a pilot in 7 states to do criminal background checks. And in those 7 states, they found 9,000 people who were turned away from employment because of what they found on their background check. 9,000 people in 7 states. So it became a national program, and 26 states have done it. And it's now my understanding that Tennessee now, with a law for mandating background checks, is in a position to apply for the last round of funding under that program. But the deadline is December 15th. And Aaron and I already talked about it. Aaron's on the case. He's going to be talking to people. Anybody who knows anybody involved in that, tell them, make sure they apply to get the federal dollars to do the criminal background checks to keep bad people out of nursing homes. Next slide, please. So how did we move this elder justice from 2010 to where we are today? The previous administration deserves a lot of credit for moving elder justice to become a national issue. Here's among the things that they did. First of all, the creation, now those of us from Washington have a bad habit, okay? We have acronyms everywhere. Everything's got an acronym, right? And everybody goes, these people from Washington never say what these things stand for, okay? So I'm going to try to go through some of these and give you a context. EJCC stands for the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. Now, I'm the son of an anesthesiologist. You know what they do for a living, right? They put people to sleep. I promised my father I'd never emulate him at a podium, but if I start saying things like Elder Justice Coordinating Council, I could put people right out. But let me explain to you in layman's terms what an Elder Justice Coordinating Council means. If you had any idea how many different federal agencies have some role and put some money in to dealing with elder abuse, you'd be surprised. It could be 15 to 18 federal agencies. Do you think one knows what the other one's doing? No. That is why you created the Elder Justice Coordinating Council. Because if you have tight dollars like we do in this country, you need to spend every dollar you have the right way. And this has now become a very important piece of the fight in the elder justice movement. The work of the National APS Resource Center. But more importantly, for the first time in history, Adult Protective Services now has a home in the federal government, in the Administration for Community Living. It's a very important step toward recognizing the importance of APS. And of course, the continued work, as Michael talked about, of the National Center on Elder Abuse. Next slide. Other actions from the last administration. Funding, appropriations. We got the first time funding for the Elder Justice Act through the Affordable Care Act, the prevention fund that has been so helpful in initiating a number of activities. But the first money for the Elder Justice Act came through the prevention fund. The work that you just heard about from Michael of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, the work they've done is remarkable in educating our public about how to avoid things like getting the wrong reverse mortgage, or even getting reverse mortgage at all. Or, my favorite, certified financial advisors, or certified senior advisors. You heard about those people? Right? They go, they allegedly take a class, get a lunch, and then they hang a shingle in their office saying that they're a certified senior planner. And they don't know any more than anybody else does, but they have a title. CFPB said, no, we're going to fix that up and have some new rules about what to watch out for. The Roadmap Project, run by the Department of Justice, again, putting resources together for the right answers on elder abuse. And if you've never gone to it, the Department of Justice has a website dedicated to elder abuse prevention, one of the great inventions that they've done in the past few years. The elevation of WEEA, that is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Okay? That became the basis of a presidential proclamation, a very important development. The Victims of Crime Act, and I'm going to talk about that in a second because there's a very significant development there as well. And then finally, during the last administration, the signing of the Bipartisan Older Americans Act into law, which says that people who work in the field in aging should have training in elder abuse so they know how to help detect it and help report it. And your senior senator, Senator Alexander, played a huge role in the passage of that bill. Next slide. In 2015, there was a White House Conference on Aging, and in that conference, they chose elder justice as one of their 4 priority issues. But as a result of that conference, the Department of Justice issued a rule that emphasizes the need for Crime Victims Fund under the Victims of Crime Act to support underserved victims, including and especially elder victims of abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, and neglect. And if you go to the next slide, why that's important is for this reason. All of a sudden, in a very strange action that not even advocates like our coalition were even made aware of, Congress voted a couple years ago to lift the cap. Now, Victims of Crime Act is not appropriated funds. These are funds that are collected from fines from criminals. And obviously, we seem to have a lot of criminals because there's a lot of money in this fund. But they chose to raise the cap, how much money you could spend, from $745 million to $2.2 billion. That's a big jump, right? So, but if you have a program that has a history of not serving all victims of crime, especially elder abuse victims, because elder abuse is a crime, especially financial exploitation, you have to do advocacy to make sure some of this new money goes for that purpose. And we're very pleased to see in a number of states, their state administrators who run the VOCA program are in fact directing new money to fight elder abuse. This is the most important amount of money that's been in the field in history. So if it's not enough of it going on in Tennessee, add that to your list of advocacy things to do to make sure that money goes in for that purpose. Next slide, please. Now, the funding history, when you went to school, this is sort of an intergenerational audience, so I'm not sure how the answer is going to be, but anybody remember a pamphlet called How a Bill Becomes a Law when you went to school? Well, throw it out. Throw it out. Because when Congress passes bills, and you read about it, you say, Congress today passed a major new law authorizing the spending of X amount of money for X program over X number of years. Well, if you go to the next slide and look at where it says, but note, when the Elder Justice Act was passed, it was $777 million authorized to be spent over 4 years to deal with elder abuse. So far, we've actually seen about $8 million, because there's a difference between what is authorized and what's appropriated. Authorizations are what you want, and appropriations are what you get. And in the world of advocacy, you can see the struggle to get that money funded has been a real one over the past 7 years, but we are still working on it and will continue to work on it. Next slide, please. In fact, let me give you a chart so you can see for yourself the situation with funding. Okay? We're making progress. There's new initiatives out there. There's new funding out there. But from what you've heard today and what you know from what you've read, this is a national problem that deserves way more in the way of federal support. So, what do we do now? Next slide. Well, first of all, in the environment that we're in right now, and don't ask me to explain it, in Washington. But the two things I tell people is that you don't panic at everything you hear or see or read in a tweet or anything else that comes about, but you don't get complacent about things either. Because when I show you an example of why I mean no panic, because there was a budget that came out that made some people very scared in this country back in the early part of the year. But complacency means that you need to get ready to fight to protect the program that you've had for a number of years. But let me be positive for a minute. Let's go to the next slide. We have a new administration. Everybody knows it. There are opportunities for elder justice to move forward in this administration, and there are already good signs in that direction. First of all, we have a very qualified administrator of the Office of Community Living, the agency that runs APS, has APS as their home, named Lance Robertson, a state director on aging from Oklahoma, who made elder justice one of his 4 pillars of what he's going to focus on. The continued work on this Victims of Crime Act and getting this new money into the states for underserved victims. When those dollars start to come in, we will see significant improvements in our ability to get restitution and things like that for victims of elder financial abuse. We are now beginning to discover, and you'll hear more about this next week when the formal national emergency is declared by the president, about the tie between opioid abuse and elder abuse. Okay, and we're going to try our best to see, please, I appreciate that, because we see it as an opportunity that we need, because it's real, and there's going to be resources available, and we need to tap into those who have the experience to help make sure that it comes together. And the Department of Justice just announced the funding of a national white-collar crime center to train over 100 law enforcement personnel in 8 different communities on elder financial exploitation. Another suggestion for advocates is, or write to us and we can give you the information. Find out what it takes to qualify for one of these grants, okay? Because if you have activity and you've got law enforcement people who are already engaged, this may be an opportunity to get some additional money in for additional training. Next slide. Also, and Michael talked about this, the collaborative work that's begun between the Department of Treasury and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, again on elder financial abuse. And I commend the number of laws that have been passed in Tennessee in the past couple of years. The background check, and then make it easier for banks and investment advisors to stop transactions if elder abuse is suspected. That's the key. You know, Don, you're right. The nosy teller is the most important person these days. Okay? Because, you know, like they say in the airport, if you see something, say something. And this is really still the case with elder abuse. And very recently, this may have very significant implications. The Centers for Disease Control, which you know deals with obesity and deals with the Zika virus and stuff of that nature, they just made elder financial abuse a new public health concern/threat. For them to move that into that space is very significant. And you can be sure, from an advocacy standpoint, we're going to be checking that out to see what that means in terms of resources. And you know, it's interesting because what they did at CDC, they not only identified it, but they included a definition that includes fraud. This is what they call financial exploitation. Fraud, breach of personal trust, poor investment advice, or improper use of power of attorney. They say all those things constitute the threat that financial abuse is. And they are very concerned. And think about this one statistic that may put this in different context. Rapidly evolving technology, decreased cognitive capacity, and social isolation make older people especially vulnerable to being scammed. But think about this too. The median wealth of families headed by someone at least 62 years of age rose 40% from 1989 to 2013. And during that same period, the median wealth of families headed by someone between 40 and 61 dropped 31%. The Willie Sutton theory. You rob the bank because that's where the money is. Okay? The wealth has grown in that direction. I'm sorry that's not on my slide. I just read this after I sent my slides down. You know, sometimes that happens in our world. So let's go to the next slide. So I gave you the opportunities that I see in this administration that are positive. But of course, we have challenges too. And the biggest challenge is in the money side. And the biggest challenge in this space is the president's call for the elimination of funding for the social service block grant in his budget. Elimination of a program, $1.7 billion program that not only is the funder of adult protective services, but it funds child protective services. It provides $35 million in meals for older adults in this country. It's a very significant program. And so far, happily, both the House and Senate have rejected the president's call for ending funding for the social service block grant. But we have to keep on it, because once you see that threat out there, you got to take it seriously. So all you who are advocates for the social service block grant, make sure your delegation knows the importance of this program in your state and why. Next slide. Other challenges in this administration, and I hate to say it, and Michael I think has left, but you know, the Consumer Protection, let me see, I'm getting caught up in my own acronyms. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau may not survive, because this was passed as part of that big banking reform bill called the Dodd-Frank Act. And there are many people in Congress and the administration who like to get rid of a lot of those provisions. And one of those things they'd like to get rid of is the CFPB. So far, that's been resisted, but if you have benefited in any way, shape, or form from the CFPB, you need to communicate that, again, to your congressional delegation. Many of you may have heard about this rule that was passed in the waning days, to finalize this rule in the waning days of the Obama administration. The fiduciary rule. It says a fiduciary financial planner has to have the client's interest at heart, not their own. Okay? Because of all the increased number of people who have been victimized by quote-unquote financial planners. So this was going to be implemented and take effect early part of this year. The administration stopped it. They said, let's reopen it for public comment. We're not sure we want to go this direction. Okay? That's a challenge to get that back. There was a rule passed about limiting arbitration in nursing homes with patients and nursing homes. The administration wants to roll back that regulation as well. Now this is the next one. You and I really heard much about this yet. But over the next month or so, there's going to be some very significant news coming out of Washington about something which many administrations do when they take office. They take a look at the government and say it's too big. There's too many agencies, there's too much duplication, there's too much, and they may be right in some cases. But this crowd is real serious about eliminating offices, trying to do what they can to streamline government. Well, we have to watch this very carefully, because some very important agencies that have been very important in elder justice and social services and human services could be impacted by this. So our coalition will be on top of this, and those who care about this should be communicating with us, and we'll let you know. And of course, any future budgets that may come out are imagine of concern. Next slide. But again, going to the more positive side of things, because we try to be, back and forth on this. We do have, and this issue has long had, bipartisan congressional champions. And if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have a law on the books today, and we wouldn't have funding. And our job as a coalition is to cultivate bipartisan champions further. And I want to share a little bit of information, and some of it is not on the slide again, because some of it just came out to me yesterday, actually. There was a passage of a bill, S-178 is its number, the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act, okay? It is awaiting the president's signature. In fact, Aaron, I checked my office before I got up on stage to see if he hasn't signed it yet, but there's no reason to think he's not going to sign it. But here is what this may be the most important bill that has passed since the Elder Justice Act. And by the way, this also is a reflection about two things that are near and dear to you. One was, this law is partially a result of people like Paul Greenwood, and the fact that places like Knox County have dedicated prosecutors dealing with elder abuse. Because this is what it's all about. This bill would ensure that at least one assistant U.S. attorney will be designated to serve as an elder justice coordinator in each federal judicial district. And each coordinator could prosecute elder abuse cases, but also be the district's point person in these cases. This new law calls for FBI agents to receive training on the investigation of elder abuse cases. It requires the Department of Justice to establish an elder abuse resource group to facilitate information sharing among prosecutors. How important is that? I mean, across state lines, across county lines, sharing of information becomes critically important, but you have to mandate doing it for it to work. ensures that those who are convicted of financially exploiting seniors through email marketing will be subject to criminal penalties. Okay, let's hear it for that one. That's really an important development. And furthermore, mandatory forfeiture and restitution provisions are included in this bill, which is about to be signed by the President. It requires the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, which is made up of leading U.S. attorneys from across the country, to establish an elder abuse working group to offer advice to the Attorney General on what their strategy should be in combating elder abuse. And I'll give you two more. It calls for the Attorney General to designate an elder justice coordinator for the entire Justice Department within 60 days of the bill's enactment. Guess who's counting those 60 days? We are. We will count them all down. And we're going to make sure that person is named. And it also requires the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission to designate an elder justice coordinator within their Bureau of Consumer Protection. Okay? These are all important things that, yeah, you can clap for that. That's a good thing. It's a very important step. But how did it get done? It got done because two bipartisan senators, Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa, a Republican, Senator Richard Blumenthal, a former Attorney General from Connecticut, came together. Because we said in November, the way we turned this conversation in Washington around about elder abuse is we call it what it is. It's a law and order issue. Right? It's a law and order issue. And if you've got people who are law and order in nature, they'll respond, and so far, this is the first proof. We have other bills like Senator Klobuchar and Collins, again, bipartisan, the Senior Fraud Prevention Act that's through the Senate. Next slide. We also have the Senior Safe Act from Senator Collins. We have a bill to create a National Elder Abuse Offenders Registry. Okay? A National Elder Abuse Offenders Registry. And of course, you have that little history on this front anyway, adding financial abuse offenders to the existing registry here, but we need to do this across the country. And the next one is interesting. We worked with two, again, bipartisan nature, Congressman Peter King, a Republican of New York, and a Congresswoman Bonamici of Oregon, a Democrat, to create an Elder Justice Caucus in the House of Representatives. Why do you do that? Because if you want to give something a little extra attention, you create a caucus, a step that's dedicated to focusing on that issue. The Senate Aging Committee is very interested and has had a number of hearings on elder abuse. So you see that there's a lot of activity going on in this space. Next slide. So what do we do now with the Elder Justice Act? Well, in reality, laws are passed for a certain period of time, and then they expire and they have to get renewed. We're in that situation with the Elder Justice Act. It technically expired a couple of years back. But at one point, because it was part of the Affordable Care Act, we thought it might get repealed. But as we all know, we began the year with the Affordable Care Act being the law of the land, and we're going to end the year with the Affordable Care Act being the law of the land. And nobody's touched the Elder Justice Act, so it has the authority to continue and will continue. But if you want to be secure in this world, you need to have your underwriting law reauthorized, and we're working to do that going forward. Next slide. So you're members of Congress. I believe that the Elder Justice Act actually could become part, and maybe should become part, of the next Older Americans Act. Because the Older Americans Act, as many people in this room know, is a wonderful program that provides a range of services for older adults 60 and above. And Senator Alexander is the chairman of the committee. He produced the last Older Americans Act reauthorization, and if he stays chair of the committee, he will produce the next one sometime in either late 2018 or early 2019. But I think it's important, and in light of the fact that you've had these conferences for a number of years, you've got the level of interest that you have by virtue of all you are here, the diverse nature, the multidisciplinary nature of your audience. Start communicating with Senator Alexander and his staff and make elder abuse a higher priority issue as he thinks about the Older Americans Act going forward. Because the Older Americans Act enjoys tremendous bipartisan support, and it might even enjoy more support if you had more elder justice provisions in it. But there's other key members of your delegation that could help in this area. Dr. Rowe, a key member of the committee in the House that deals with the Older Americans Act. You've got a member on the Appropriations Committee that gives out money. You've got a person who's on the Ways and Means Committee that deals with Medicare and nursing homes and the Social Service Block Grant. And another one on the Energy and Commerce Committee that deals with Medicaid. So one of the things that's very important to do is understand not only who your member of Congress is, but what committees that they sit on that have relevance to the work that you do. So, believe it or not, somebody from Washington can have, next slide please, can have conclusions. Imagine that. And there's an old saying that a good speech should always end on the same day it begins. So I'm endeavoring to do just that. But I will tell you, and Aaron is a marvelous witness to this, because he and I have probably endured many of these battles together. And nothing comes easy in the area of elder justice, even though it should. We passed child abuse prevention legislation 42 years ago. And we have expended $9 billion to fight child abuse, which we should. We passed family violence legislation in 1986 and spent billions of dollars there, and we should. 20-plus years ago, we passed the Violence Against Women Act, which has been a critically important piece of legislation. But it has taken a long time to get elder abuse in that same sphere. But I will tell you, we are moving because it's about grassroots education. It's about raising awareness. It's critically important about advocacy. It's about making noise about something that you know needs to be dealt with. And yes, even a little political action never hurts. And the last slide, and I think this is something that anybody who's working in this space, whether you're at my level, doing advocacy work at the national level, doing APS, doing ombudsman, doing social service, whatever it may be, we're doing the work for the right reason, to prevent elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And I don't think anybody in this room, if you're at this conference and spent the whole day here, is ready to slow down. You may want to speed your pace up a little bit and work together with us at the national level going forward. Because you're here, because you care and you want to be advocates. So remember, my favorite expression about advocacy, think of advocacy like you would a postage stamp. Stick with it until you reach your destination. And with that, I will put this resources page up, and let's see if there's anybody who's had any questions. But thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today.